It is said that prostitution is the oldest profession. However, coming shortly behind must be the pickpocket. It survived from ancient times throughout to the present day. Hi and welcome back to the Historical Crimes and Criminals podcast. I'm Steve and it's another History Bite episode. It is a profession for all ages, from young boys and girls to the elderly. If they have the skills and the opportunity, the most skilled pickpocket will have your valuables before you can blink. In literature, the most famous pickpocket is of course the Artful Dodger in Oliver Twist. He ends up being caught and transported. He's part of Fagin's school of young pickpockets. And almost like we see in modern colleges, these students would first spend time being taught the numerous skills of the trade. One of these would be to attach a bell to a jacket, and they must be able to steal the wallet from the walking mark without sounding the bell. On graduating, they would apprentice with an experienced pickpocket and learn out in the streets by watching, working in teams, and slowly practicing on easy targets. After this, he would be part of a gang and expected to pay his own way. And due to the nature of the role, of course, this gang was ever changing, and new recruits would look on in awe at these experienced pickpockets, just as generations later in World War II, new pilots would look on those who had fought in the Battle of Britain. Pickpocketing was profitable business. In 1855, the Times newspaper reported the activities of Charles King, a man who ran a gang of professional pickpockets. Amongst King's gang was a 13-year-old boy named John Reeves, who had stolen over £100 worth of property in 1 week alone. That's almost 15,000 in today's money. Items stolen had to be easily disposed of, and surprisingly, the most stolen items were men's silk handkerchiefs. They had a high resale value, and owners' initials could easily be picked off, making identification impossible. Field Lane in London, for example, the setting of Fagin's den in Oliver Twist, was the home to several notorious receivers of stolen goods, where it was believed that more than 5,000 handkerchiefs were handled each week. Often these were hung on poles outside the shops for sale to passers-by, many of whom went back there to buy their own stolen property. Another favourite object of the thieves were scarf pins. Often adorned in valuable stones, the thieves would sometimes have a pretend fight with another pickpocket, stumble upon the person, placing their hands on the victim's chest as though to catch themselves. And as they pulled away, they snatched the pin off, asking if they have hurt the victim, apologising, and they left the scene of the crime before the victim knew what's happened. And there were many methods. The term robbing you blind comes from a method of throwing pepper in someone's face and picking their pocket whilst they're incapacitated. Fairs, theatres, markets, and even hangings were all the perfect hunting ground for the pickpockets. And there was always a lot of crowding, bumping, and jostling, perfect to accidentally knock against someone and pinch their valuables. At Greenwich Fair in 1835, 13-year-old Robert Spencer was caught by a policeman drawing a handkerchief from the pocket of a gentleman in the crowd. In 1840, another constable stated in court how he witnessed 11-year-old Martin Gavin and another boy try several pockets before stealing a gentleman's handkerchief amongst a crowd that had gathered round a traffic accident. And we only have to look at the court records of two different time periods to gain an understanding on the evolution of pickpocketing. The prosecutions against pickpockets at the Old Bailey between 1780 and 1808 show that male pickpockets were somewhat younger than the female ones. 72% of the men's pickpocket convicted at the time were aged under 20 to 30, whilst 72% of women convicted of picking pockets were aged between 20 and 40. One of the reasons that might explain why women's pickpockets were older is that most women pickpockets had been prostitutes caught in the act. At the end of the 18th century, 76% of women defendants were prostitutes, and as a result, the victims of pickpockets were more often men than women. Married men would also make the perfect targets, as they would not want the public shame of admitting to being with a prostitute, and he wouldn't report the crimes. However, between 1830 and 1860, over half of the defendants tried at the Old Bailey for picking pockets were younger than 20 years old. And the reason in the increased number of these pickpocket schools becomes clearer when, after 1800, children between the age of 7 and 14 were considered incapable of forming criminal intentions, but could nevertheless be found guilty, where this was proven beyond doubt. In theory, children convicted of serious felonies therefore faced the full penalty of the law, namely sentences of imprisonment, transportation, and even death. In reality, death sentences bestowed on children were almost always commuted to lesser sentences on the grounds of leniency. Of the 103 children aged 14 or under who were sentenced to death at the Old Bailey between 1801 and 1836, not one was executed. Death sentences for girls and boys under 16 years of age were in practice usually commuted to transportation. Well, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this History Bite episode, and if you did, please subscribe, leave a review, join me on Twitter, and till next time, bye bye.